This is episode number 98, featuring artist Peggy Immel.
This is the PleinAir podcast with Eric Rhodes, publisher and founder of PleinAir magazine. In the PleinAir podcast, we cover the world of outdoor painting. Called PleinAir, the French coined the term, which means open air or outdoors. The French pronounce it plein air. Others say plain air. No matter how you say it, there is a huge movement of artists around the world who are going outdoors to paint. And this show is about that movement. Now, here's your host, author, publisher, and painter, Eric Rhodes.
Thank you, Jim Kipping. The podcast is brought to you by Streamline, premium art videos. I started this business because I wanted to see art videos in a certain way. As an artist, there were things I wanted to know about the artist. I wanted to get into their head. I wanted more detail. And so I created Streamline Premium Art Videos, and we only sign the cream of the crop, the top of the heap, the very best artists in the world. These videos are fantastic Christmas gifts for any painter, or a good gift to yourself, quite frankly. It's the gift of learning, and we go into so much depth, and you really get a chance to, they're kind of like, workshops. Some of them are really long workshops. So check out our amazing lineup of top painters at StreamlineArtVideo.com. The interview is also brought to you by the PleinAir Convention, the world's largest plein air event. It is in San Francisco in wine country this April. Amazing spots to paint. San Francisco is the most popular location yet. You don't want to miss out on getting these tickets. This year we will have over 80 top artists teaching and working with you to become a better painter. We're going to be painting together daily, all of us. It's amazing. It's historic. It's a lot of fun, and you can learn more at PleinAirConvention.com. And after the interview, I'll be answering a few marketing questions in the Marketing Minute. But first, let's get right to our interview with Peggy Immel. Well, Peggy Immel, welcome to the PleinAir podcast.
Oh, thank you, Eric. I'm really delighted and honored to be asked to participate in it.
Well, we're the ones that should be honored here. It's great to have you on the show. You live in Taos, is that right?
That's right, Taos, New Mexico. My husband and I have lived here for about 15 years. We moved from the East Coast.
Where did you move from?
We were basically in the Boston area for over 30 years, and then we spent a short amount of time in New Hampshire. We had a vacation home there, and ultimately moved west. We're both from the west, so we wanted to come back west.
And why Taos?
But we love New England. Why Taos? Well, we traveled around. We took about 6 years to decide, and we looked at Tucson and Sedona. We just traveled all over, but we love Taos, so this is where we are. I'm glad we decided to be here.
Well, it's got a fabulous history. I'm sure you've seen the PBS documentary they did out there on the Taos painters. But what a fabulous history of painters and great influences that have lived in and around Taos, and of course many ended up also around Santa Fe. But that's a great background, a great place to be.
Well, when we moved here, we chose Taos ultimately because it was a wonderful combination of a very rich creative arts community, and it has a great ski mountain. So we love skiing in New Hampshire. We love the outdoor pursuits we could follow there. But Taos has a wonderful combination. So we just have a wonderful community here.
Oh yeah, and you're in a community of some fabulous artists: David LaFell and Sherry McGraw, Kevin McPherson and Wanda, and I'm sure there are many there that I'm not aware of that are there. But and it's a pretty small town, isn't it?
I think it's about 5,500 in the town. The greater area is larger, maybe 30,000.
Yeah.
But the town has about 5,500 people. It's pretty amazing to have this kind of creative talent in a town this size, I think.
And do you find that you're really inspired living there?
Yes. I love the landscape. I love the other artists. It's a very close-knit community. We have figure groups, portrait groups where you can just show up and paint. We have a Taos PleinAir group. It's just a casual group. We go out weekly. A couple of women run that. It's just, it's supportive. It's wonderful. It's beautiful to be here. And we have galleries. So I think everybody is art-oriented.
Oh,
we also
absolutely.
have a great writing. We have a great writing community.
Well, and you have the Fashion House, and you'd be able to go over and just look at the Nikolai Fashion paintings, every once a year or twice a year or something like that. It'd be pretty special.
Yeah. You came up, I think, when you were in Santa Fe? Did you
Well,
come up and look at the Fashions?
I came to Taos on a few occasions. I've been there. I was out there a couple of times when David LaFell painted my portrait. I was also there when we came out to the PleinAir convention. We were doing a lot of site selection about where we were going to go painting, and we were actually talking about going over to the Pueblo, which is an amazing place. The problem was that we couldn't get a guarantee that they wouldn't randomly close it down one day for any reason, which is kind of unpredictable. And we couldn't take that chance by, sending all of our painters there and having them show up one day and have it be closed, which was a real tragedy because it's a really spectacular place to paint, as I know you know. Right.
Well, there's so much to paint here. The problem is finding out where your path is, but it's a pretty rich community. And it has, I was thinking, you mentioned the fashion. We have, off the top of my head, I can think of 5 museums: the Millicent Rogers, the Harwood, the Couse House, where one of the founders lived, and the historic museums, which have the Blumenschein House, where Ernest Blumenschein lived. So it's a town with a lot of culture for 5,500 people.
Very rich art
fun
heritage.
To be here. Yeah, it's fun to be here.
Well, I'm sure everybody listening is like, okay, enough about Taos. So, we're really here to learn about you, to kind of learn about your career and your painting and what you've been up to lately. And so I always like to kind of start up and just kind of ask, what was the process of getting where you are today? How did you end up as an artist? Well,
I think, like many artists, I started as a child. I think I had my first lessons at about age 10. I got my first oil painting kit then, and I can still remember what it looked like.
Oil painting at age 10, that's pretty unusual.
Right. Well, my dad was in the military, and we were in Salina, Kansas, and there was a woman who taught painting lessons for kids, and I wanted to take them, and my parents were great. They got me the oil kit. I still remember what it looked like. It had Grumbacher tubes in it.
Yep.
So I started then, and then just throughout my life, painted, pursued art. I studied architecture for a couple of years and got married and worked in the field. And then when I had my son...
What do you mean worked in the field? What does that mean?
Worked in the architectural field. I did.
Oh.
You don't need to, or at that time you didn't need to be licensed if you worked for somebody. So I did a lot of interior design and that type of thing. And then ultimately stayed home with my children. After my son was born. And that's when I started painting. Pretty much just painting. And I finally received formal, I hadn't had any real formal art training except for the rendering classes in architectural school. When we moved to New Canaan, Connecticut, I had my first real, I guess you'd call it art training, at the Silver Mine Center there. It's near Westport.
Yeah.
In Westport, Connecticut's, pardon me, quite a hub of artists. I think a lot of illustrators probably in the 50s and 60s.
Well, New Canaan has
the
distinction of being the most expensive real estate in America.
I know. I wish I owned that New Canaan house today, but but I don't. So we were there. My husband was in the corporate world, and we were there, and I took classes at New Canaan, and coincidentally, I was painting in watercolor at the time, and I really wanted to take this class from John Pello because he was a renowned watercolorist, and sort of the bonus to that was that it was a plein air landscape class. So that would have been in the mid-'70s.
That's back before it was really popular.
Yeah, was that before you were born, probably? But,
no, sorry.
Anyway, he taught the class plein air. It was a landscape class, and he taught it in plein air. He was quite a plein air painter, and one week he would do a demonstration in oil, and the next week he would do a demonstration in watercolor. And then we would paint, and then we would have a critique. And that happened once a week. I don't know. I took it the whole time I could. It took probably a couple years of it. What a resource. He was great. And since that time, actually I've discovered books that he had. And as I read them, I find that a lot of the principles he taught are the same principles we go over today. But anyway, he was a wonderful teacher, and he taught us. I remember the funny thing about him. For me, that was my first plein air painting experience, and it was intimidating to paint in public. And he said, well, I said, what do you do about people who talk to you and they get behind you? He said, wear big, heavy shoes and flick your brush. So I've always remembered that. And then I had my first real painting experience while I was taking that class. We were in New Orleans, and I tried to paint in the French Quarter. And it was intimidating. That was a long time ago, but it was intimidating.
Well, it's intimidating to this day for a lot of people. I love it because, I like to interact with people. But if you're learning, you're growing, you're experimenting, you're kind of going through that process. It's a little intimidating. This is not about me. I apologize, but I was standing painting Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, and all these teenagers were smoking cigarettes and standing around and watching me. And this one kid came up and spoke English. He said, "Your painting really sucks." and so, I think if I'd have taken that to heart, or if I'd have been a new painter, I might have quit, over something like that. I didn't care at that point. But I think that's something that we all face. And I certainly, there are a lot of new people that are listening who are, trying to learn to paint. And they're, some of them will even say, gee, I'm a little intimidated to come to the plein air convention because all these good painters are there, and I don't want to be seen painting my bad paintings in front of them. And I think the one thing that's really important to kind of communicate to everybody is we've all been there. We've all gone through this.
Exactly.
And this is exactly what you're talking about.
Exactly. And it doesn't bother me today. I love it when people come up to me, and I love chatting with people. But I remember that first time painting in New Orleans, and I put my easel up and backed myself up to a wall so people couldn't get behind me. However, the good news out of that trip was someone asked me if I would sell one of my paintings, and I said no because I wanted it. I wanted to keep it.
Yeah.
But that was really gratifying. So I think the fear is genuine for people when they're new, trying to go out and paint in plein air. But usually people are impressed with what you're doing. They're thrilled to see what you're doing.
Well, and that's right. And even if you're not very accomplished, it's probably more accomplished than they are. And
exactly.
One of the great techniques is to take a pair of earbuds and stick them in your ears, put the wire in your pocket.
Right.
You don't actually even have to be listening to something, but if they see the earbuds, they typically won't interrupt you.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I think, you can always try to ignore people, but anyway, it's I think it's emotionally more intimidating than it really needs to be. So that was one of the wonderful things I learned from this man was that, just get out and do it. Just get out and paint and enjoy people and ignore them if you don't want to talk to them.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Yeah, he was a great teacher. I enjoyed him.
So what happened from there?
Well, let's see. Where did we go from there? My husband was in the corporate world, and that's kind of like being in the military, so you just travel around a lot. We moved from New Canaan to, I think, Ipswich, Massachusetts, and Wellesley, Massachusetts. I guess we moved to New Canaan after that. So we had a short period of time in Kentucky, and then we moved back to Boston, and we were in Boston for about 30 years. And during the time I was in Boston, I took classes at various art schools. We lived in Lincoln, Massachusetts, which has the DeCordova Museum School. It's a great resource. And also the museum, the MFA has a museum school, and I took some classes there. So I painted, raised my children, evolved, just kept painting. I think if you're a painter, you're just going to be committed to painting. I didn't try to sell anything. I just painted for me.
Well, that's nice if you can do that. And quite frankly, taking the pressure off is really kind of nice too. Is that you don't, at least initially, you don't have to do it. You can
right.
always go there later.
Right. I wasn't trying to make a living as a painter at that time. I had my son at home. My husband was in a pretty high-pressure world, and I was of that generation. I was fortunate, actually, to be able to be a stay-at-home mom, and I painted and studied, and I always thought I would eventually try to get my work into a gallery and sell. And ultimately, when we moved to Taos, that's what I did.
Was it a Taos gallery?
Yes, actually, Wilder Nightingale. I still show there with him. Just a wonderful guy. He's been very supportive. And I was in one gallery in Santa Fe for a short period of time before that. And also, during that, what I'll call a gestation period, I entered shows. I think that's a really important thing for people to do, I think it allows you to see how your work stacks up with other people. It teaches you how to prepare the paintings you want to present. And you can pick and choose the shows. It's not as high pressure as trying to provide work for a gallery. It just puts you out there in the world. If you ultimately want to sell your work, I think that's a good stepping stone. It allows other people to see your work. Kind of toughens you up a little bit, too, to rejection. We've all had that. So I think it's really good until you're at the point where you want to sell full-time, if that's what you want to do, that you enter shows. Try to get yourself ready.
So
the world's very different now. You have websites and any number of resources to show your work.
So talk to me about painting. I love to talk about painting. I love to talk about technique. I like to learn how other people approach things. Why do you paint, and what do you paint?
Well, I think now what I'm painting the landscape here in Taos. That's what interests me. And I feel it's really important to paint the thing you understand and love. I don't live on the ocean. I don't want to paint boats. Maybe if I lived on the ocean, I would. What I want to paint is what I'm near. And since we're talking plein air, it's landscape. I guess for me, it's hard to think of painting something I don't have personal attachment to. I'll give you an example. To do a plein air event, in a place like Hawaii, for me, would be very difficult. I don't really know Hawaii. I don't understand it. I'm not familiar with the landscape. I could go there and paint and enjoy it, but it wouldn't have quite, and I might paint it as a personal memory, but it wouldn't have quite the resonance for me that it would if I lived there and had a real sense of the history. There wouldn't be a personal story to me painting Hawaii. I might just paint nice pictures.
Right.
Hopefully nice pictures.
So do you think do you think that comes through? I mean, do you, for instance, travel and paint in other places, or do you think that because you're not intimate with the landscape that it's going to come across in the quality of your painting?
I do think it comes across if you don't know a place in the quality of your painting. However, I think it's a lot of fun to go somewhere and paint something you've never painted before. It's a great personal experience, and it can stimulate ideas that you then take back to the place you want to paint. But I really love the idea of painting something that you know very well. And in fact, Steve and I have, our house here in Taos has about 5 acres, and it's in the grasslands part. I dare say I could spend the next 2 years just painting on this 5 acres and just be thrilled with that, and it would have great personal resonance for me. And I would hope for other people. I think I've noticed that other people, people who might want to buy your paintings, I think they see that. That's just my opinion. But so, yes, I do travel and paint, and I like it, but I view it almost as a vacation. Like I've painted in France.
Yeah.
And I have those paintings. I wouldn't sell them.
Well, what I love about the PleinAir lifestyle is that, you can, in theory, I mean, not everybody gets to do this, but you can travel and paint. You can paint and travel with other friends. You can go on these excursions like some of these things that we do, or these weeks where we all paint together like summer camp. But it's social. It's still challenging. I definitely have areas that I prefer to paint, things that I prefer because I love them, but I also love to go to something that's completely obtuse to me because I think it really stretches me as a painter. It's like around where you are, you're probably used to using a lot of, certain colors and so on because the landscape calls for it. But if you were to move to a completely different area to paint, it's going to be different. Painting in France is going to be different than the colors you're going to see in Taos. Exactly.
But it is a learning. It is helpful as a painter to do that because I think it helps you to grow. One example I'll give you is that I've participated in the PleinAir for the park in the Grand Teton Park for 4 years now. And the first year I went, I'm familiar with the Tetons, but I didn't have a real sense of it, a personal attachment, if you will. I just thought it was a really beautiful place. And I liked the paintings I did. Well, this year when I went back, I had so much more feeling for it. And I understood it, and I knew the parts of it I really wanted to portray. So I think my paintings were better because of that.
Yeah.
And I also think I grew as a painter for that.
Yeah.
So I like to paint in different places. I just view it differently than if I don't want to say it's not serious painting because it is,
of course not.
But
what I think, to me, those are, those are memories.
Exactly.
I hang on to my studies. I never sell my studies. I regret it, but they're memories because I will look at that painting and say, I was with Peggy. We were in Taos together, or we were in Paris together, and, we were hanging out with these other artists, and, a deer ran across in front of us in that particular day, and it was a cold day, and, it's different than a photograph, because you have that whole experience that you can kind of remember, and I think that's a wonderful time just to be able to sit in the studio and look up at all the different paintings and remember those times together.
Oh, I would agree with that. It's a different experience, but it is wonderful. But you see, that's a personal attachment. That's what I mean.
Yeah.
By having a personal attachment, there's a story there for you, and so the painting means more. And I do think that comes through. Yeah.
So in terms of imparting some of this great wisdom that you've accumulated over these years of painting,
oh, please.
Let's kind of talk about how you formulate a painting. When you are out walking around through the bush or wherever it is you're walking around, and you go, I'm going to make a painting of that. What is it that calls you out? How do you know that it's the right place for you to paint?
Well, first of all, I think there's a painting everywhere. So if I choose to go to a place to paint, I usually have a reason that I've chosen to go there. It's usually a subject that interests me. But the thing that will grab me really, I think, as I think about it, is the light, probably the patterns. And I take a long time to decide exactly what I'm going to paint. Often, if I go with other people, they'll be painting long before I am. I walk around, I look, I turn in all directions, and it's usually the light. But it could be an emotional response to a place. Perhaps it's a place I have a particular feeling about. And I like to prepare when I am getting ready to paint. I'll write down all my ideas, my thoughts. Lately, I've been writing a haiku before I paint a painting.
What?
They're not very good. Yeah, I write a little haiku.
Oh, give me an example. Doesn't matter if it's good. I've never heard this one.
Well, haikus are little poems that are 5 paragraphs, or 5 syllables, 7 syllables, and 5 syllables.
Right.
I don't have my art book in front of me. And it's hard, I'm not a writer. But let's say I'm at the Rio Grande and I see a view I want to paint. I try to pinpoint why I'm attracted to it and why I want to paint it. And I've discovered that by writing these little haikus, I have to focus on what it is about that scene I care about. Let's see. It's hard for me to talk to you and compose a haiku. If I had one, I'd read it off to you. And they're not very good. They're for me personally.
It doesn't matter, but it's really an interesting approach because it's kind of a discipline that's forcing you to really think through things.
Right. It is part of this decision I made. I made it 2 or 3 years ago to focus on a particular area every year, to pick something that I really want to focus on. And deciding why you want to paint something is a pretty critical thing.
When you say focus on something every year, what do you mean? You mean like one year you'll focus on trees, another year you'll focus on streams?
It's usually more basic than that. The first year I decided to do it, I was focusing on shapes because I discovered that I didn't handle shapes in my paintings very well. I thought I could improve that. And I made myself do a no-tan, do 3 no-tans, or I actually prefer to do 3 value.
Tell people what a no-tan is in case they don't know.
A no-tan is when you take a scene and you divide it up into a black and white pattern. All the darkest values go into the blacks and all the lightest values go into the whites. And that's a little arbitrary, and so what I like to do is it's not a true no-tan, it's a tiny little, maybe a 1x2 drawing that has 3 values in it. And it would have black, white, and gray, and I would divide a scene up into those 3 values. And then I can look at the shapes that are going to be in the painting, and I can play with the shapes. And it's hard. It's a very visual kind of thing, obviously. But So I worked on those for about a year. I made myself do at least 3 before I started any painting. And I hope my shapes in my paintings improved. I mean, I still see bad ones sometimes, but I think that's important if you want to grow, is to choose those areas where you think you could improve and then focus on them for a given period of time. And we never want to do that because the things that are hard for us are the things we don't want to do, like sit-ups. But I think it's helpful. So deciding what you want to paint falls into that category. I've noticed sometimes folks have a hard time deciding what they're going to paint. And I think that there's a painting everywhere. So once you decide that, then you can decide what it is about a particular view that's attracting you to paint it. Is that
sense.
Confusing or?
Nope, makes complete sense.
Right. In fact, I took a Jill Carver workshop, and I think one of the exercises she gave us, which I thought was just brilliant, was to stand in one spot and to paint a painting in all 4 directions, a little, take 45 minutes. And that proves to you that there's a painting everywhere. It's just a matter of looking.
Yeah, I've often said that, a really great workshop is to set up in an alley somewhere and tell everybody, find some beauty in this,
exactly.
dumpsters or brick walls or whatever.
Exactly. Those are all disciplines to getting better at painting. Gives your painting, gives your effort a focus for a year or 2. And every year I try to switch it up. It doesn't mean I've mastered the thing I was focusing on, but at least I've paid attention to it for that period of time.
Makes a lot of sense, sure. I think it's a good discipline.
Right, and I like it.
So when you're making a painting, how do you decide what you're trying to communicate?
Well, it's that thing, whatever it is, that attracted you to want to paint it. It's less about the subject, although the subject could be part of it, but it's really less about the subject and more about the emotional feeling that the light pattern or the colors present. Mm-hmm. That is what attracts me. It's about light and dark, I think, for me, ultimately.
Do you paint what you see?
No. I heard myself echo. No, I don't paint what I see. I do and I don't. I feel perfectly comfortable changing things. If a tree is not in the best location, I'll move it. Do you paint what you see?
No. No, sometimes I do, and sometimes I'm happy with it. But no, I think that what I'm trying to learn, and this is not easy for me, is try to figure out how to create some drama in the scene. So you may have a scene that's really a great scene. The light may be interesting, but what can you do to really enhance the drama of that scene? What can you do to enhance the light, or what the light is hitting, or darken other parts of the painting so that the light is standing out more, even though you're not seeing it dark the way it is. So I think that's the constant challenge.
I think I'm still trying to learn to do that. I have a painting on the easel right now that I'm trying to do that with. How to create light, how to create the appearance of light. One of the things that I've been thinking about a lot this year is color temperature. And I think color temperature has a lot to do with the impact of a scene. And I'm trying to think of how to explain that. I had a person who took a workshop last winter, and I was teaching winter landscapes, and she had done this beautiful painting, but it didn't have drama. It was a frozen stream and willows, and there was some light coming across, and it just didn't have drama. And I said, well, I think it's the color temperature, the lightest color temperature of the snow was still a cool blue, and when she changed that color temperature of that highlight to a warmer blue, it was still blue, but she made it warmer. It brought the whole scene alive.
Yeah.
She didn't have to make it darker or lighter. She just changed the temperature. It's a sort of a secret weapon, I think.
Well, I think color temperature is a challenge. You know, I've been threatening to put together what I call a checklist or a flight list because, you know, when I used to fly airplanes, and when I'd go into the airplane, you know, you'd have a checklist of things that you had to go through before you ever took off, and you know, I'm kind of thinking about a checklist where it would be like, okay, you know, big shapes, check, tone dominance or color dominance, check, or warm, is this a warm painting or a cool painting, check, you know, and just go down this list of all these things, you know, kind of at the beginning and then again at the end, because at the beginning it's like, oh, I should be thinking about this, because, you know, the tendency is you want to just get in and do the painting, and yet you want it to be, you know, you want it to be a great painting, and so you might not be thinking about color temperature all the time, and then at the end, you know, you can kind of go through, did I get my color temperature right? You know, do I need to make any adjustments on that? You know, check. So I like it.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I actually have two thoughts on that. The first is that we have all these, quote, rules, which I think are mostly suggestions. I think of them as recommendations about various things in painting, like values and composition and color temperature. It's really hard to remember all of those things while you're painting. So I think it's important to get yourself ready for the painting, and that checklist would do that. And then you let it go. And you paint intuitively. And when you get to the end, if a painting's not working, then is the time to go back and look at all those recommendations and say, did I do this? Did I have an uneven distribution of values? Do I have some warm versions of a particular color? That can help you, because if a painting isn't working, there's a reason. And if you go through that checklist, you'll usually see the reason.
Yeah.
It's a critique. It's a form of self-critique.
Well, maybe we'll have to come up with one together. And
yeah, I'd love to. I mean, I think it's a.
So what would be on your checklist? Let's go through all the things real quickly. Well,
I'm trying to. I could actually pull my checklist up.
Oh, you have a checklist.
I have one. Let me see. It would be, I can try to remember it, but it's values. The first thing is that rule of having unequal distribution of all things. For example, you don't want an equal distribution of light and dark. You want one of them to dominate. Let's see if I can get my checklist.
So
quickly.
It would be light and dark dominance, color dominance, temperature dominance, shape. You know, you don't want to have all your shapes equal. You know, your horizon line is the same amount of space as your your grass or your object or your trees. You want to some big, some small, some little.
Yes, it's basically that. Did you make your point? What is it that you? Let's see here. I'm looking for. Here we go. Self-critique. General composition, variety of size, what's your eye movement over the piece, your center of interest. Did you support that with a contrast in values, color, edges? The values, compare your original NOTAN or value study that you did, particularly if you're having a problem with values. I've seen often people will do a value study. I've done it, and then you just ignore it. But if you do that value study and use it as a guideline, it's helpful, at least to me it is. Look at the color in terms of the color scheme, saturation, the relative temperature. This is pretty wordy, but your paint quality, edges, your brush strokes, surface quality, and most importantly, is your drawing accurate? If you're painting in a folk art kind of fashion, that's probably less important. I see people doing that today, so their drawing is not truly realistic.
Well, they may be doing it because they don't know how to do it any other way.
That could be, but I think if one is going to do that, one needs to be consistent. You know, the error has to be consistent always, has to be the same error. If the heads on your figures are too big because that's what you're doing, they always have to be too big. Is that making sense?
Yep.
Consistency that way. So that's my checklist.
Oh, that's pretty good.
Which I give to people. Yeah. Which I give to people. So I think it's an important one. It could be less wordy.
Well, maybe you would put that up on your website and people could visit your website to get it. What's your
I'd be happy to do that.
What is your website?
PeggyImmel.com.
IMMEL.
E-L. Right.
Okay. All right. That'd be nice if you'd do that. I'm sure people would appreciate that.
Oh, I'd be happy to do it.
All right. Terrific. What else do you want to talk about?
Gosh, I don't know. I have my list here.
You have a list?
You bet. I don't have a lot more to talk about. I'm just thrilled that I'm able to paint and be here in Taos. Oh, also, I'm looking forward to the PleinAir convention. Being invited back to that in San Francisco. So that's exciting.
It is exciting. Thank you.
Yeah.
You've been, right? You've been. You went to Santa Fe.
I demoed in Santa Fe,
That's
actually.
Right. That's right.
I did a demo on architecturals, and I loved it. I enjoyed it.
So what's the key to painting architecture and making it feel right?
Not being perfect about it. I do have a thing, and this relates to architecture. I have a tendency to want everything to be perfect in a painting and a drawing, and I painted very realistically when I started, very egg-tempera, detailed. And that's my natural tendency. So I think it's a natural tendency for people in architecture to have all the windows line up and they're all the same color. Everything's just perfect. And that immediately looks out of place to me. So the key to me is to go in and paint the thing as you might naturally paint it, and then go in and scrape parts of it with a palette knife or kind of mess it up a little. I think that helps.
Mm-hmm.
And not cover up key corners.
What's that mean?
That means the peak of a roof. If it's critical, for example, that the peak of a roof show so that people understand what's happening on that building. If you're having a hard time with the peak of the roof, making it correct, work at it until you get it correct. Don't put a tree in front of it. I see that all the time. People cover up the corners and the key parts of a building of architecture.
Yeah, so you don't have to have much of the house showing, but to tell it's the peak of a house, you really got to have that peak showing.
Exactly, and if you put something, and if you put something in front of it, then what people focus on is what's going on behind that bush. They don't look at the painting. Yeah. So I think that's a key. Make the windows different. Just don't make things perfect. Is to me the key.
All right.
Simple key.
All right. Terrific. Well, I've learned a lot from you just in this very brief time, and I like your checklist. I'm going to steal it and tack it up on the inside of my easel somewhere and go through it. And so there's been some very valuable stuff that comes from this today.
Oh, thank you, Eric. Thank you so much for asking me to be on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Well, I'm happy to have you, Peggy, and thank you. And we'll see you at the PleinAir convention in April in San Francisco.
You bet.
This has been the PleinAir podcast with PleinAir Magazine's Eric Rhodes. You can help spread the word about PleinAir painting by sharing this podcast with your friends. And you can leave a review or subscribe on iTunes so it comes to you every week. And you can even reach Eric by email, eric@pleinairmagazine.com. Be sure to pick up our free ebook, 240 PleinAir Painting Tips by some of America's top painters. It's free at pleinairtips.com. Tune in next week for more great interviews. Thanks for listening.
I want to say thank you again to Peggy Immel for being on the PleinAir podcast.
This is the Marketing Minute with Eric Rhodes, author of the #1 Amazon bestseller, Make More Money Selling Your Art. Proven techniques to turn your passion into profit.
In the Marketing Minute, I try to answer your marketing questions, which you can email me or text me, Eric at PleinAir Magazine, or get on Facebook Messenger or Instagram or whatever. Anyway, here's a question from Sam in South Dakota. Actually has two questions. Sam says, I'm considering selling my prints of my work. What are the best practices in selling my prints? Well, I think the print market is a great way to multiply yourself and get money out of something you've already painted. First, you want to make sure that you reserve all the rights in case the painting was sold. You want to make it legally known that you own the reproduction rights. This is a copyright discussion you have with your attorney. Secondly, the print market has a little bit of a stigma, less so these days, but some galleries don't want to carry artists who sell prints. Others see the value and want to sell prints. So you got to kind of work that out. If you have a gallery, you got to figure it out with them. You can have different kinds of prints. Of course, you can have a canvas print called a giclée. You can have a print on paper, and there's a lot of different variations. You can offer it framed, unframed, etc. But of course, if you don't have a gallery, you don't need to discuss that. You just sell it on your website. A lot of artists do it, and a lot of them make a little bit of money. Some of them make a lot of money. And you probably want to do limited editions to make them a little bit more special, signed limited editions, numbered. I think the old stigma is going away, but you do want to make sure that you don't flood the market. You want to make sure that if you do have a gallery, that they're on board. The other thing is you might license your paintings. There are companies who sell prints and give you a commission. They do a lot of volume, so your commission won't be as high, but they will sell thousands, and you'll probably get a decent check, and your work will be out there. That's pretty cool, too. Sam had another question. He says, I'm giving away my artwork for art auction fundraisers. Is this a good idea? I think it's a great idea, Sam, but I think you need to have strings. Now, you may have a charity that you really, really love, you really want to help, and you don't want to have any strings. That's okay. But I would do, 6 or 8 charity auctions a year, maybe more in your local town, because charity auctions tend to attract who? Affluent customers. And who do you want? Affluent customers. So you can brand yourself very well with these things. So I'm all for helping a charity, but you may want to consider what you can get in return for the investment you're making. So I have an in-depth piece about this on my blog at artmarketing.com, and I talk a lot about it in my Art Marketing in a Box product. But here's the essence of it. You can kind of say to them, look, I'll give you this $3,000 painting, but in order to do so, I need something in return, because typically a painting isn't tax deductible for value. I can only deduct my materials. That may have changed. Check that with your bookkeeper or accountant. But you say, look, I'm willing to donate this painting for you, but in exchange, would you be willing to make the painting a featured item on your marketing for your mailers and your website, using my image of the painting, my name, the name of the painting? Will you mention my name on stage as a major donor, or introduce me publicly in front of everybody, do something special? Will you share the names with me of all the people you marketed to, so that I can follow up with them and maybe send them my newsletter or something? Of course, I would get your approval on anything I send. And I, of course, need a ticket for 2 to the event and that special introduction on stage. And also, I'd like to get a list of all the people that bid on my piece so I can, of course, approach them about other paintings on an ongoing basis. And again, I'll be tasteful about it. But first off, a $3,000 gift is usually a pretty substantial gift, or a painting is considered a premium. And most charity auctions don't have a lot of premiums. Sometimes they do. So look for a way to get premium recognition, maybe some signage, maybe a big sign next to your thing with your picture on it. So that's the kind of thing you want to try and do. And I do this when I do charity auctions, whenever possible. Once in a while, I'll donate one to somebody I really like and don't need all of that, but that's just a good way to get a little more out of it. Today's podcast was sponsored by Streamline Premium Art Video. You can learn more at streamlineartvideo.com. Also sponsored by the PleinAir Convention, which is a must. This is going to be the best yet. San Francisco, amazing lineup coming. A lot are already announced, even more coming. It's going to be in San Francisco and wine country. And if you think that this is all about city painting, think again, because we've got some pretty incredible locations picked out. And by the way, you got to paint the Golden Gate Bridge at least once in your lifetime. I mean, that's pretty incredible. You can learn more at pleinairconvention.com. If you've not seen my blog where I talk about life, art, and other things, check it out. It's called Sunday Coffee, and you can find it at coffeewitheric.com. This is always fun. I love the podcast. I love talking to artists. Let's do it again sometime, like next week. I'll see you then. My name is Eric Rhodes, and I'm the publisher and founder of PleinAir magazine. Remember, it's a big world out there. Go paint it. We'll see you.